and how trendy or conservative or whatnot their dress is. And that tends to inform me on a lot of things. And, I mean, it sounds crazy, but maybe that's the magic of design, is that I figure out a concept that works. And so much of design is developing a concept. Well, I think it's about every art, right? You start with a concept, whether you're writing, whether you're doing hip-hop or music or design or painting or ballet. It's all about creating a solid concept. And sometimes for creative people, it just pops in your head. And that's not the answer anybody wants to hear, but it just sort of starts to reveal itself the more you get to know people and the more they start to reveal themselves, the more you see these little things that you can kind of work in here and there to tell the story.
Yeah, definitely I can see that. Yeah, I can definitely see that for sure, the way that they kind of create and make the story happen and things of that nature, whether it's something like this podcast or whether it's my dad's photography and some of his other artworks, that you definitely get to see the reflection of their personality in what they're doing. So I can definitely see how that would shape the conversation. Now, fortunately here in Durham, in the Triangle area, I would argue, now there are a few people in the interior design and architecture firm that seem to have had this concept. Because one of the things that I did have, as I mentioned earlier, and we were talking to G just briefly because he's going to have hopefully Pierce on the show and everything, is from what I understand, there's definitely Freeman Ledbetter who tries to incorporate some of his stuff that he does in the real estate field with trying to create an image and kind of like the stuff that you do and things of that nature. And then definitely I got the impression, and you can tell me if you ever met the man and you got that impression as well, but definitely when I think of Phil Esquilon, and unfortunately I hate to say it, I have not been to the History Museum. I know I should be ashamed of myself, and I need to go there at some point, but when I've talked to people that have gone, they talk about the fact that he seems to try to incorporate a lot of the stories the same way that you do with the houses that you create. So it seems like he had a similar kind of philosophy to the way he created the things that he built, whether that was one of the items here like the Deepak or whether that was the History Museum or some of the projects that he was working on. So I don't know, did you ever have the pleasure of meeting Phil or doing any work with him?
With Phil Freelon? No, I did not. I wish I had. Pardon?
Yeah, go ahead.
I wish I had. I had read many articles about him, kept up with the museum going up in D.C., of course, familiar with his work around the area, and it's just such a huge loss for us all.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that, no doubt, because he was definitely a force to be reckoned with here in the area. What are some of the projects of your own that you were really impressed with and that you would like to, if somebody wanted to know about a Nicole Baxter project, you would point to them and be like, well, this is kind of what I do. So what I know that on your page you had a couple of them, including, like, I believe some that are in the downtown Durham area, but what are some of the projects that you think reflect what you do the best?
Oh, gosh. So most of mine are private homes. I did many, many, many years ago, I did some of the early foundation work for Revolution when Revolution went into the Baldwin building downtown. I think that was one of the very first high-end restaurants in downtown Durham, I think. So if people saw Revolution, that's definitely an insight to some of my work down there. But by all means, hop on my website at nbaxterdesign.com and check out some of my portfolio images. For me, I mean, I really take inspiration from my clients. And so it's always tricky looking at a website or design like mine because it's so client-specific. And I think part of what we need to do is learning how to see beauty in put ourselves outside of our body to see it in other people, in other work, and other situations. So sometimes I joke around that, you know, people look at my portfolio and they're like, well, what's going on here? And I think that's a message to really get across, is that it really is about the clients and them being happy with their home and it reflecting who they are. Because I don't do a signature style. I think we get lost in signature styles and designers wanting to express who they are rather than expressing who their client is. It's very tricky.
Yeah, and it seems like you just said, more and more people seem to want to do that. They seem to want to get those signature styles that don't reflect the person, whereas what you're talking about is something that would actually, when you went in those rooms or those houses, you would get the personality of that person, or at least get a feel for what their personality is. You might have to have conversations to get further into their personality types, but at least it gives you an initial thought of who they are, and they might have some whimsical nature about them that you would see in that furniture or this furniture. So is there any particular pieces of furniture that you really are proud of that you have placed in a house that were of some sort of whimsical nature?
Oh my gosh, I did a black dining room with a green malachite ceiling and some beautiful modern crystal chandelier and a wall that was all decorated with giant oversized white paper flowers. It was
so the wall
crazy and beautiful, and I love it so much, yeah.
So that definitely sounds interesting. Give us another description of another house. That was very fascinating. I want to hear about another one.
So I did a kitchen recently. We ripped out the white kitchen with the white countertops, and we put in walnut cabinetry, slab finished, long gold bar hardware, and a giant island. And we wound up using quartzite instead of quartz or marble or granite on the countertop backsplash, and some giant Kelly Wearstler square pendants over the island, which are kind of irreverent and modern lights up there. And it sort of was, a snub to all the current trends, the painted cabinets and the white on the bottom, white on the top and the black on the bottom, or the gray and the blue and whatnot. And we went back to real wood, and it looks so modern and so just fresh because it's so different, and my clients couldn't be happier. I love going over there when they're making dinner and everybody's moving around and we can see how the kitchen flows work. Because to me, seeing it in action, that's what good design is about.
Now, speaking of good designing, what advice do you give to people that unfortunately are living in, like myself, apartments or condos, and you can't necessarily call a house designer in because it's owned by an apartment complex, and 9 times out of 10, your apartment complex is owned by somebody that's in Timbuktu. Like I know in the case of here, I think their corporate headquarters are Florida. So what advice do you give to people that might want to shape their house or their apartment, but they can't necessarily rip out a wall because their apartment complex isn't going to go for that, or they can't exactly rip out the cabinets because they come with a certain kind of style because every apartment is pretty much put in the same kind of way. Now eventually, because I know in here where I'm at, Diplomat, they eventually may move you because they want to ship you from one unit to another because they're redesigning themselves, but it still may not shape your identity. So when people are living in apartments or in roommate situations or things where they aren't necessarily in control of being able to, say, rip out a floor or do any of that kind of stuff, what kind of advice do you give them in order for them to create their own identity?
And feel comfortable, right? So a little secret for me is I go in and I paint at least one room in every apartment that I've been in. Sometimes I'll change out a dining room light fixture because that can always be wired back in on when you leave. Paint can always be painted over, so it depends on how adventurous you feel. But I think what the most important thing to think about is what is it about? What is the single story? And that's what I like looking at other art for when you're looking at like a really nice painting, or you're listening to a song, or even other design work, or even outfits and fashion design. Going into other art forms allows you to understand the concept behind it. And I think that's the most important thing for everyone, whether you're a homeowner or a renter, is we all have to buy furniture. We all have to invest in furniture. You can't interact in a piece of architecture without furniture. But I think it's really about everybody learning how to create and establish a concept. What is this about? How do the elements relate back to each other? And sort of let go of the idea of, I like this color, I like this style of cocktail table, I like arts and crafts, I like farmhouse, and creating a mishmash of styles is looking at it as a way you would put an outfit together. Does this all make sense together? Does this all tell a single story? And that's the hardest thing to explain is the concept setting. But I think once people understand that and that they're able to create fabulous spaces on their own and mix things up and break some of the rules just by knowing where they are within their concept.
Wait, that makes a lot of sense. Now, one of the things I've always had a conversation with different friends of mine and everything, and I'm curious to bring in Amarat on this part of the conversation as well, is we always want to also incorporate to some degree nature in our conversation as well, because I know, I would love to have a pet, don't have a pet currently at the moment, and the argument that friends give me is that you're too busy. You're ripping and running. You're doing this cultural thing and that cultural thing. You can't afford a pet or a plant or anything of that nature because you don't have the time to take care of them. But I know to some degree, just having these kind of like other elements in your life, whether that's a pet or whether that's a plant or whatever, can also help with the inner peace. But then you have folks that are like, well, you can't really do it because you don't have the time for it. So I was wondering, do you incorporate plants?
So you are opening up a whole other conversation, right? So it's really interesting to me. One of the things that I find fascinating is there's a little fold in the middle of our brain, and it's called the interior insular. And it's this piece in our brain that processes intuition, emotion, and beauty all at the same place, right? So beauty really matters to us, and it really makes us happy, and ugliness can really make us depressed and sad. So we need beauty and we need design in our life. But the other thing is we also respond to varying textures, and we also respond to nature. So if you think of the African savanna, that is one landscape that is universally appealing to almost every human being. And it shows us this wide open space. And it's easy to know when you're, goes back to the beginning as early man, being able to hunt, being able to see that we're safe, being able to see our surroundings. In modern times, that need life comes in a whole study called biophilia. And it's incorporating natural elements into our house. Whether it's may not be so alive, you may have an idea that likes to eat that. But it's also used natural materials in unexpected ways, and it's incorporating even furs on pillows and throws, and mixing up natural textures within your textiles in your house, or maybe putting up a raw wood piece of furniture or accent wall, or getting some stone in there in some way. But getting the elements of nature in your house is incredibly important.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I do know some people, like the PETA people, that may not be all that happy with the concept of having furs in the house and everything just because they are worried about the destruction of the animals. But there are also those images that aren't necessarily from the actual animal.
Right. There's so many fabulous faux out there as well, and some luxury vinyls that look and feel just like leather. Will last for a long time. It's not the Naga hide of the 1970s we're so used to, right? There are some fantastic materials out there, and it's just bringing in a bunch of textures into your house. And things that just make you happy. So, right, you want to touch them and you want to see them. And, our brain, 3 or 4 months old, our brain learns to, probably about that age, our brain starts to recognize texture without having to touch them. So we can see a cat and we know what the fur feels like, right? So our brain loves that interesting and that novelty of texture because it gives us almost a physical response, the visceral response to something that we see. And that goes back into nature with leaves and trees, woods and stones, and it just enriches us and it keeps our mind happy. We like happy minds. Brings us to
definitely like happy minds, and that actually brings me into an interesting thought, which is this whole concept of, I've had conversations with friends and acquaintances that actually believe, and then I want to bring Lamaradi in, and I think I had another call as well, but there's this whole concept that some people believe that that kids and children that are of like baby age are not actually, that their brains aren't developed and that they're not actually observing or thinking about these things that we're giving them and everything. I actually think that we actually should encourage our kids, their baby age, to actually learn these things. I know, while I have no kids of my own, I remember when my nephews were born, I saw my dad going out and showing them like plants and leaves and animals and basically like encouraging them to be involved in that conversation. And they were probably at that time maybe 2 months old, if not younger and everything. But he was already having these kind of conversations, whereas sometimes people are like, they don't get it. They're babies. You're talking to them as if they're going to know any of this stuff.
That video that went online around Father's Day of that father sitting around talking to his little boy, right? And then I think they did the Denny's ad. Do you know who I'm talking about?
Yes.
It's like the kid was watching cartoons or something, and his dad was sitting there having a conversation with him. So here's the thing to remember about babies under
from birth to 3